We inhabit a time in which vanishing feels almost illicit. Today's culture worships exposure, always on, always reachable instant replies, public routines, and relentless sharing of wins, thoughts, and movements. Platforms have recast reflection as something suspect and quiet as an unpardonable lapse. Visibility has become proof of worth. Yet what if nonstop display is quietly suffocating your chance to grow into who you're meant to be? Do you feel the pressure to stay visible is getting in the way of real growth? Comment 1 if you've felt compelled to be always on. Comment 2 if you've already experimented with stepping back from visibility. Carl Jung, a seminal thinker on the psyche, argued that real change does not occur under constant observation. It demands retreat. It asks for disappearance, not as avoidance, but as a bold commitment to rebuild. He termed this conscious descent, a purposeful plunge away from performance, others' expectations, and noise. In his view, the people who transformed most profoundly were the ones who risked stepping out, canceling obligations, leaving social media, and adopting a stance of sacred unavailability. If you feel these psychology sharings are helpful and relatable, you're welcome to become a channel member and stay with us on a deeper journey. As a member, you'll get early and extended access to more in-depth practical content that you can apply in everyday life. Removed from outside pressures, they discovered what chaos could never reveal: their core self. The reality is, you cannot become new while others insist on relating to your former self. Constant visibility online or offline acts like an anchor. Each alert message and casual exchange reasserts the old identity. When you're striving to become your best, that continual reinforcement becomes a silent saboteur. In this video, we will examine Jung's idea of strategic disappearance in depth. We'll see why even a temporary vanishing can be one of the most potent actions of your life, and exactly how to carry it out. You'll learn the 4 pillars of intentional absence, radically limiting your availability, eliminating passive consumption, building reconstruction routines, and keeping a transformation journal. If you feel confined by an identity that no longer fits and sense a new self ready to emerge, but don't know the way, this video is for you. You won't get cliches or quick fixes. You'll get hard truths and a clear path. And if you're brave enough to walk it, you won't just disappear, you'll be reborn. The most confining jail of our century lacks bars, walls, or keys. It's constructed from notifications, invites, tags, and likes, a relentless, unseen captivity fueled by pressure to be perpetually present at work, online, in group chats, at celebrations, in every exchange. The rule is simple: if you don't appear, you don't count. Jung recognized what few would say aloud: continuous exposure undermines profound change. Being endlessly socially present traps us in the mirror of our past selves, not the selves we're becoming. Each interaction cues others to respond to the version of you they remember. Even if you're in transition, even if change is underway, within the new can't take root while those around you continually reaffirm the old. It's like swimming against the riptide of other people's expectations. The effect is quiet, yet crushing. A text from someone who knew you as a kid pulls you back into the same insecure teen. At a gathering, you slip into familiar routines, identical jokes, identical roles. Nothing shifts because you're encircled by mirrors reflecting only what used to be. Jung understood the psyche as both flexible and highly suggestible. When we're continually submerged in contexts that define us by our past, our odds of surfacing as a new self fall dramatically. Hence his clinical observation: the patients who progressed most were the ones who broke the loop of visibility. They learned to say no, not from disdain, but from necessity. They stepped back. They disappeared. And in that absence, they carved the inner space required to rebuild. You may feel you're advancing reading, listening, watching content like this. Yet, if you're daily compelled to perform the same identity for others, your inner progress will be stunted. It's like sowing a seed and digging it up hourly to check for growth. Even temporary disappearance is liberating. It rejects the roles imposed on you so you can discover who you are without spectators' applause or outside demands. It quiets the world so you can finally hear yourself. But absence must be intentional, guided by method and discipline. Hiding isn't sufficient. Rebuilding is essential. That is precisely what we'll examine next. We'll look at conscious descent and how chosen solitude can become the soil where your best self at last begins to grow. If this resonates, consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your support. Few grasp what genuine isolation entails. Many label it cowardice breakdown or weakness. Jung saw it differently, as a psychological rite of passage. He called this process conscious descent and regarded it as a foundational step toward real transformation. Conscious descent isn't merely skipping outings or uninstalling apps like a weekend cleanse. It's a deliberate radical pause from social roles, public performance, and continual distraction, an immersion into a space where the true self can surface free of judgment, spectators, and filters. Jung underwent this himself. After parting ways with Freud, he stepped away from academic spotlight social obligations, even routine clinical work. Rather than seeking answers from books or peers, he built his tower at Bollingen on Lake Zurich's shore and began a deep process of self-exploration. In years of seclusion, Jung sketched mandalas, kept a journal carved, stonewalked, and reflected. As others puzzled over his quiet, he was engaged in reconstruction. That season was anything but romantic, dense, tumultuous, disorienting. The quiet of isolation is uncomfortable. It exposes. Cut off from external noise, you inevitably face your interior world. Anxieties lose hiding places. Repressed desires clamor, and contradictions surface like specters. This is exactly where the real work starts. Conscious descent is the psyche's underworld, as though you're moving through a dark cave by torchlight, learning what lives in your depths. The passage can be frightening, because you'll meet long-rejected parts of yourself, fears, wounds, personas, shadows. Yet this subterranean place is where your power resides. Jung maintained that individuation, the becoming of your true self, begins with a decisive break from the outer world. Rebirth requires a symbolic death, which is strategic disappearance, stopping existence in the form others recognize to uncover who you are, beneath the layers built to please, belong, and endure. Have you ever tried a deliberate retreat from roles and routines to meet your truer self? Comment 1 if you've attempted a strategic disappearance. Comment 2 if you want to try, but haven't started yet. Yet vanishing alone is insufficient. Directionless absence risks alienation. Solitude needs structure, intention, and practice. Jung didn't retreat into idleness. He fashioned conditions for real inner work, a space for action, not passivity. And that is the essential point you must grasp. Disappearing is not the same as hiding. It is neither an impulsive retreat nor an escape born of avoidance. Genuine disappearance is strategic and painstaking, almost like an inner engineering effort. Jung didn't promote disorderly withdrawal. He urged building a psychic stronghold in which one can reconstruct without outside intrusion. Such rebuilding needs organization clear pillars. In this video, you'll learn the 4 pillars of strategic disappearance, practical structured steps for rebuilding while others assume you've merely gone quiet. The fade is only the surface. Beneath it, you'll be quietly forging a stronger, clearer, and more resilient self. It's not merely leaving the stage. It's about the work you undertake once the lights go dark. Pillar 1. Radically reduce availability. Your initial rupture is with being constantly reachable. Sever the compulsive tether to the outside world. Silence notifications set windows when you are entirely unreachable. And stop explaining your absence as though you're indebted to justify it. You do not owe anyone accounts of your time. This is the starting point of personal sovereignty. When you restrict people's access to you, something potent occurs. You reclaim your attention, energy, and focus. And more crucially, you start to undo the conditioning that cast you as a 24/7 social performer. Pillar 2. Eliminate passive consumption. The next step is to dismantle the forces that keep you reactive: news cycles, social platforms, bite-sized videos, and relentless entertainment. These flood your mind with noise and shatter your attention. Jung recognized that the psyche needs quiet to digest the unconscious. Continuous consumption pulls you away from inner creation. The aim here is to swap passivity for production. Write, make, build. Convert hours once spent in distraction into hours of expression. Move from spectator to protagonist. Pillar 3. Create reconstruction routines. With the noise muted and empty consumption stopped, establish habits that consolidate your emerging identity. Deep reading, reflective journaling, vigorous training skill, acquisition, and meaningful project work. Jung prized the body-psyche link and understood that tangible action strengthens interchange. Here, you restore discipline, sharpen clarity, and fortify strength. Each repetition reaffirms your pledge to the new self. Pillar 4. The Transformation Journal. The final pillar documents your rebirth not for an audience, but for you. It's a daily record focused less on events and more on who you are becoming. This notebook is an inner mirror, a psychological lab, a map. In it, you identify old patterns and mark the rise of new behaviors. Writing moors the invisible to the visible, giving form to what is still gestating within you. These 4 pillars aren't abstractions. They're practical moves Jung himself used to reconstruct after his break with the scientific establishment and an existential crisis. They chart a direct, if uncomfortable, route to individuation. The process is demanding. It calls for discipline, courage, and above all, uncompromising honesty about who you are and who you are not yet. Yet even with these practices, isolation ushers in an unavoidable confrontation: silence. And within that silence awaits a more formidable adversary than the outer world yourself. Next, we address this meeting with your fears, hidden desires, and unsettling truths. You'll see why silence is not rest, but revelation, and why it becomes the final trial for anyone intent on rebirth. At a certain point in strategic disappearance, everything stills. Feeds fall silent, messages dry up, invitations end. The once urgent world drifts to the margins, nearly irrelevant. To many, the quiet feels freeing, but it is the real exam. In that very silence, what you've avoided all your life surfaces you. The ache of silence isn't bodily, it's psychic. It arrives as a nameless unease. Early in solitude, your mind sabotages you with temptations. Check Instagram for a minute. Reply so you don't seem rude. Open YouTube. You've earned a break. With discipline, if you hold your ground, the fog thins, and then the authentic voices begin to surface. Deprived of constant anesthetizing stimuli, the mind starts to cast outward what has long sat in the cellar of awareness: old fears, feigned, forgotten regrets, unresolved anger, deserted dreams, and parts of you muted to fit others' molds. Jung described this with stark clarity. Individuation begins when the ego meets the unconscious. That encounter often arrives through psychic pain, not because you are broken, but because you're finally touching long repressed parts of yourself. Silence exposes and strips away. It offers no pardon. Yet when everything feels awkward, alien, and chaotic, clarity begins to appear. You recognize how often you reacted to the world instead of authoring your life. How many choices were driven by approval, seeking fear of rejection, and the upkeep of an image that never matched your essence. In quiet, the theater becomes visible. Here is the truth: the discomfort is necessary. It signals the masks are loosening. Jung knew there is no light without first meeting the dark. The pain of silence is the womb of transformation. There, the new identity starts to take shape, however subtly. Discomfort loosens old patterns. Solitude cultivates clarity. This doesn't mean the work is done. On the contrary, real transformation begins now. Deconstruction isn't sufficient. You must rebuild a self not designed to please, but to live in wholeness. And this rebirth is not public. It unfolds in the dark, in silence, like all that is sacred. Could you sit with silence long enough for uncomfortable truths to surface? Comment 1 if you've completed a phone-free or notification-free retreat, even just a weekend. Comment 2 if silence still feels daunting and you tend to avoid it. Next, we'll examine this rebirth, what truly occurs when you re-enter the world after vanishing, and why, done well, your return is not reunion, but revelation. The world will no longer recognize you, and that will be your greatest triumph. After weeks or months of strategic absence, disciplined quiet, and inner labor, something shifts without fireworks. Transformation proceeds like a seedling under soil, unseen from above, yet relentless in force. Eventually, the time to reappear comes, returning to social life and outward existence. The irony is that if done properly, reappearance is not a return to the old self, but an emergence, a revelation, a psychological rebirth. People see you, yet fail to recognize you. They can't name the change. Your face and voice are the same, but something unsettles them, a presence, clarity, and steadiness that weren't there before. They're rattled because they expected the familiar you, the agreeable one who conformed and played by the unspoken rules. Instead, they face someone who no longer requires external validation, who refuses to contort to projections, who has been tempered by the fire of silence. Your return is almost anticlimactic to others. While they preserved appearances, you dug deep. You didn't come back to be seen, you came back to live authentically. Your presence alone unsettles those still imprisoned in false selves. Jung regarded this shift as an inevitability of individuation. The true self appears only when the ego is restructured and superficial identifications are dissolved. When that occurs, you stop reacting and start creating your path. No longer driven by the world, you steer your experience within it. Strikingly, on your return, you have nothing to prove. No explanations are needed about where you were or what you did. The evidence is in your eyes: posture, decisions, chosen absences, and the quiet resolve with which you refuse old patterns. You are no longer a mirror for others. They cannot project themselves onto you. That may frighten and distance some, yet it also inspires. Because authentic change stirs the collective unconscious. It unsettles the complacent and rouses the dormant. The new you is a hybrid of the former and the reborn one who has integrated shadow, learned solitude, faced inner demons, and returned carrying wisdom. Now belonging anxiety yields to peace. Fear of rejection gives way to integrity. Performance is replaced by presence. One question lingers. Why undertake this? Why vanish? Bear the ache of silence and rebuild out of sight. The answer rests in its total impact. Rebirth transforms not only your interior, but your ways of living, loving, working, and existing. That is what comes next. In the next section, you'll see why disappearance marks the start of real freedom, and how embodying this new self becomes your most radical act. But freedom in Jung's sense isn't merely escape from noise. It's the reorganization of your inner order around a new center, the self, rather than the persona. Strategic disappearance gave you a temenos, a protected psychic precinct, where the shadow could be met, the animus heard, and the defensive ego softened. Now comes the less glamorous, more demanding task, architecting a life that keeps this center intact when you re-enter the field of other people's wants. Jung called this trajectory individuation, not cutting off from the world, but returning to it, oriented by an inner axis instead of outer applause. Notice what actually shifts. Formerly, your persona, the reliable one, the agreeable one, the always available one, functioned like a social passport. You traded alignment for approval and mistook validation for vitality. In solitude, you learned the price of that trade fatigue, distortion, and a hollowing at the core. When you confronted the shadow, you discovered that the drives you disowned, anger, ambition, erotic imagination, hunger for boundaries, need for mastery, were not enemies, but energy. Jung's point is ruthless and liberating. Psychic health does not come from purging darkness, but from transforming it into service of a larger purpose. To become yourself is to bring these exiled forces into relationship with conscience, craft, and love. Practically, your return is less a grand announcement than a subtraction with intent. Fewer explanations, deeper presence, fewer performances, sturdier patterns. Establish new covenants with reality. Latency is the default, no instant replies. Responsiveness follows discernment, not compulsion. 2. Calendar follows calling projects of soul anchor the week. Obligations must justify their claim. 3. Speech is sacrament talk that preserves image, yields to talk that pursues truth. These are not productivity hacks. They are walls that protect the temenos you just built, so your center doesn't dissolve on contact with the old weather. Expect turbulence. As projection loosens, some bonds will strain. Those who relied on your persona may call your boundaries cold or your clarity pride. Let that be. Jung warned that what is withdrawn from others' projections often returns as their irritation. Equally, you'll glimpse what he named synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that cluster when your inner pattern and outer path begin to rhyme. New mentors, precise openings, converging threads, not magic, but a psyche no longer scattering its signals. Above all, resist the Orpheus reflex. Do not look back to check whether the new you is convincing anyone. Looking back is a vote of no confidence in the very rebirth you underwent. Let proof accumulate in habits, priorities, and the quiet authority of your posture. When the self leads you, stop showing transformation and begin being it. The world may call this minimalism, boundaries, or focus. You'll recognize it as the ordinary radiance of a life ordered from the center, out freedom, not a spectacle, but a stance. Withdrawing for a time is no simple choice. It is courageous, today's equivalent of entering the dark cave you most fear. And as Joseph Campbell said, that is where the treasure lies. Strategic disappearance is more than a pause. It is alchemy. You go in fragmented and conditioned by others' expectations, and emerge whole, lucid, and aware of your own power. Jung grasped this profoundly real transformation cannot unfold under continual scrutiny. Psychic growth is intimate and requires retreat. Like a snake shedding skin, you must cast off what no longer serves, solitary, painful, and essential. Few realize that true freedom isn't doing anything at any time. True freedom is no longer being captive to others' opinions of you. It is aligning with what pulses within, even without applause, even amid criticism, even when others turn away. For when you become your best self, you live by principles rather than impulses, with direction instead of distraction, and in presence rather than performance. This version of you, forged in quiet, formed by discipline, sustained by inner practices, is unassailable. It doesn't live to please, prove, or petition for attention. It simply is. Such being is magnetic, authentic, transformative. You inspire not by effort, but by inhabiting real depth. Therefore, strategic disappearance is not an ending, but a beginning. A life where you do more than survive. You build, create, lead, serve, and live with purpose. The world may look unchanged, yet your way of inhabiting it is utterly different. And that changes everything. Are you considering a season of strategic disappearance to return as a truer version of yourself? Comment 1. If you're planning a concrete window for it soon. Comment 2. If you're opting for smaller daily withdrawals instead. If you'd love to keep receiving more meaningful videos about psychology, healing, and understanding yourself better, consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. Your registration not only unlocks more valuable content for you, but also gives me the motivation to keep creating and sharing regularly.